Uh, Good morning. I am very happy to have the opportunity to speak here alongside so many interesting experts from the sector of agriculture and also other related sectors. So I would like to thank Dr. David for giving me this opportunity. I have chosen a topic that I feel is one of the biggest current problems, considering the way decision making is done on the level of the European Union and how.
Já vás nebudu napínat s tím, abych odpověděla na tu otázku, kterou si kladu vlastně v názvu toho mého tématu. Já si myslím, že ta odpověď
I believe that the answer to the question I have posed in the title of my presentation is clear, and I don't think the interests of farmers are well represented. And I'm going to speak about why I think so. For over 4 years, I have been working in the European Parliament, where I have been involved in the committee's work, particularly in the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. So I have the opportunity to see closely how the various regulations and directives are decided on. After the new version of the Common Agricultural Policy was approved in 2021, the EU started drafting proposals and changes to the existing legislation to match all the Green Deal strategies. So Green Deal is being put into practice now in the form of proposals for the regulations and directives and amendments of the current legislation. And all that has the summary title Fit for 55. But there's a lot of things which are not correct in that, but my pre-speakers have mentioned that many times, and I believe those during the afternoon session will elaborate on that as well. But I would like to focus on how this is being decided, because this is a fundamental issue. Almost all of the proposals which are being brought up today are being assigned to the Environment Committee as the main guarantor committee. It is the biggest committee in the European Parliament. And as a guarantor committee, they receive also topics which are purely agricultural ones. And often the farmers do not have the main voice in these issues, but those who are decisive are the environmentalists, and these are influenced by organizations paid by multinational companies. And some of the activists who are pushing through these things perhaps are confident that they are doing positive things for the benefit of the environment, but the reality is different. So let us now look at how the proposals are assigned to the committees. I have said that the Environmental Committee receives the majority of the issues. So how that happens? Under the rules laid down in the European Parliament's rules of procedure, the legislative procedure is such that a new proposal is first debated in the committee and then in the plenary meeting. And the Conference of Committee Chairs decides to which committee a certain draft regulation or directive should be assigned. And the competencies of the individual committees should be are defined in an annex to a relevant legislation, and this should be used in assigning the tasks. So there would be the main guarantor committee, and then other committees to debate the proposal are identified.
ty další výbory teda dávají jenom
So
stanovisko
these
těm hlavním
other
výborům,
committees
potom
just submit their opinion to the main guarantor committee that votes on the proposal.
dostanou vlastně
Or
starosti vzhledem k
another
nařízení nebo
option,
směrnici,
the relevant directive or regulation is assigned to more committees who are even in their positions. Then proposals for amendments are submitted to each of the committee, but then they hold a joint meeting when they should vote on the proposals. As regards the second option, it has been tested at the beginning of this mandate, that is since 2019, but it has turned out that it does not work because the interests of the eco activists and farmers are completely different. And because the Committee on the Environment is the biggest one, the Agriculture Committee is simply outvoted. So now the main guarantor committee for the Green Deal regulations and directives is the Environmental Committee, and the other committees just submit their opinions, and the Environmental Committee then decides whether they like those or not. And they are decisive. So the European Commission drafts an ambitious proposal whose ideas are inconsistent with the reality or are on the verge of feasibility, and the other committees like the agricultural ones or the Committee on Industry, Energy and Science, whose MPs are a little bit more rational. So those try to mitigate, to moderate new proposals, even though not always sufficiently. But the Environmental Committee goes in the opposite direction, so they do not include the other committees' proposals or opinions, and they go even further beyond the original proposal of the Commission. I'm going to demonstrate some examples as well. Recently, there was a proposal for a regulation on the means or plant protection preparations. So before this goes to the European Parliament for their voting, it is often debated by the Environmental Committee at the last moment, so there is no chance for the other committees to get ready for the plenary meeting or to resubmit their proposals for amendments. They do not have enough time for that. And with the plant production preparations, the Environmental Committee voted 8 days before the plenary session. Nevertheless, what has to happen there before the voting, all the proposals for amendments to be submitted to the plenary must be translated to all the official languages of the EU, which takes some time, of course. And if there are some new proposals, some time is needed to review whatever has been approved by the Environmental Committee. And if there is a time of 2 days, it is, for example, it is insufficient, of course. And in this voting, in the plenary session, the lead rapporteur started talking about the rules for voting, on how the vote should be taken. And the weekend before that, and also on Monday and Tuesday, she was doing that. And the last version of the ballot paper was provided 10 minutes before the final vote. So this illustrates how the European Parliament votes, and it is really hard to manage all the work within the time that is available. It is impossible to do the work properly. So that was one example, but there are some other examples. And concerning the proposal for the concerning the spraying, to provide one more example of disrespecting the opinions of farmers at the plenary. No, sorry. The Environmental Committee received from the Agricultural Committee 24 or 27 proposals for amendments, and the Environmental Committee did not approve a single proposal out of the total amount. And these were things that should have been assigned to the Agricultural Committee on the basis of the topic, but still the Environmental Committee was the main guarantor. Another example concerns submitting of objections. The Environmental Committee often submits objections against expanding the usability of preparations that were granted exemptions for their use. Specifically, in the 1970s or 80s, before the Treaty on a Common Act was adopted, the legislation was adopted mainly in the form of regulations and directives. Now there are additional legal acts which actually specify the thing, and the regulations and the directives are to some extent general. Since the 1990s, the so-called new approach was adopted. And at the turn of the millennium, the European Authority for Food Safety was established. Měl na starosti opět výbor pro životní prostředí, který teda rozhodl, že se tyhle and the Environmental Committee decided now that the plant protection preparations will be tested for 10 years, and even at the beginning it was clear that it was unrealistic because it takes a long time before reaching a final conclusion on whether the preparation is safe or whether any limitations need to be adopted for its use. And if there are preparations which are not safe, then a scientific study must be carried out to abolish those. But still, the Commission had the authority to grant exemptions before the research is completed. And the Commission grants these exemptions through the European Authority for the Safety of Food and the European Chemical Office, but the environmental committees keeps submitting objections against these exemptions without being interesting whether there would be any alternative or whatever. So it is just clear policy, clear political motivation for them. I could mention some other topics, such as petitions, for example, which arrive from farmers who have problems with wolves or bears, for example. And the Agricultural Committee is trying to deal with that. Also, our political group, we are trying to come up with solutions in those areas where the wolves are overpopulated, but the Environmental Committee strictly rejects that. They do not want to even to discuss it. They organize some formal hearing. They contact environmentalists and they talk about about a wolf being a beautiful animal. Well, yes, I do agree with that. It is part of the nature, but where this poses problems, issues to farmers, it must be dealt with. And this is simply a topic that the Environmental Committee refuses to take into consideration to help farmers. So these are just a few examples of the work of the European Parliament and how the European Parliament proceeds. And this clearly shows that there is an error, there is a flaw at the very beginning of the process, and this, of course, then negotiating the regulations is problematic. So thank you for attention.